All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody to the session with the University of Law. We've got Dan Weston here, who's the Head of Academic Masters in Law at the university, and Dan has completed his LLB at the University of Kent, and he's also received a distinction in LLM research and legal interpretation and linguistic analysis. He's also received a PhD from the University of Leicester and has undertaken a graduate teaching assistant in human rights law and judicial reasoning through the scope of freedom and speech. And he's going to be here today running the session, and we'll be taking any questions that we've got at the end of the session. So over to you, Dan, and thank you so much for doing this presentation for us today.
Hi, thank you very much. No, it's my pleasure. And thank you for that introduction. And welcome everybody who's watching. I think I should give it 20 seconds more so the live stream can catch up. Is that right?
We're all good now.
Okay, we're all good. I'll crack on then. And yes, so a very warm welcome to everyone watching in whatever capacity you are. As mentioned, this will be a presentation on the possibility of undertaking what we refer to as the AML at University of Law, which is the Academic Masters in Law. And this offers a fairly sort of unique approach to the courses that we offer at University of Law. And at the start of the presentation, I'm going to sort of give a bit of an overview of the university as a whole, but that won't be the primary focus. The primary focus will be on the specific function that the AML has and some of the unique advantages that it offers and how that sort of may be advantageous from both a scholarly and career-oriented perspective, hopefully in the way that they overlap as well. So I'm hoping the slide sharing is working. Is that the second slide has moved on, I presume?
We're still on the first one.
Okay, I'm on the second one. I was a bit worried about that.
Yeah, it's on the second one now.
Oh, it is on the second one. Okay. Yeah. So it just took a second to change, I think. So as you can see, there's a few sort of general bullet points on the screen for the sort of university as a whole before we move on to the specifics of the AML program, or the various programs that are offered on the AML anyway. And the University of Law is a very large university, which comes with a variety of advantages as well. And as you can see on the top left, there's 14 campuses in the UK and Hong Kong. And the campus in Hong Kong is relatively recent, but it's a nationwide university at the very least, with a fairly sort of long and established pedigree in, historically speaking, being providers of legal education in the sense of training practitioners, especially. That's sort of that's the furthest history of the university in terms of its sort of expertise. But obviously, in recent times, we're talking a very long time ago there. We offer a variety of courses now. The sort of specialisms in training legal professionals do still exist, but we also offer a variety of other courses, one of which is the AML, which is more of an academically oriented course. It has a variety of potential functions in sort of development of your careers and how it can help in those regards. But I'll say a bit more about that in the future. So we have trained more practicing lawyers in the UK than anyone else, which is a big part of the historical pedigree of the university. And there is quite a big specialism as well. As I go on to just generally from a university perspective, there's quite a big specialism in sort of corporate-oriented subjects as well. But that's not the only thing that we offer. The AML obviously focuses on a variety of things. There's a variety of different programs you can take. And just because the historical pedigree of the university tends to be more oriented around sort of professional training and corporate-oriented modules, that is very much a change in dynamic now. And the specialisms that the university has historically have developed a lot in recent times. But one of the big things that's sort of remained consistent, as you can see on the top right there, is the sort of pro bono and work experience that can be offered at your time here, because that's synthesized with everything I'll be talking about on the AML. This is something that's provided to all students at the university, the opportunity to work with a very sort of prominent pro bono team, which can provide experience in the legal sphere if that's something that you're looking to gain. But of course, the AML itself doesn't lend itself only to legal-oriented careers, which may sound like a strange thing to say at the outset, but it's not training you specifically to qualify as a lawyer, the AML. It's something which is it's an LLM. It's a legal master's, which opens doors to a variety of different routes. One of which would, of course, be further study in the law, and in doing so, working with the pro bono and work experience teams will be particularly beneficial. In very similarly, as you can see in the following point, the 5th point there, this relates to the sort of legal careers and employability service that the university offers generally to all its students, and the students on the AML are no exception to that. So this employability service is potentially very useful regardless of whether you go into law or something else afterwards, because as I'll say, the LLM does offer a few different kinds of subjects which are legalistic but may open doors in other respects as well. And of course, you with such a long history and such a variety of specialisms, there's quite a large alumni as well. So that's sort of the general points. Hopefully moving on to the 3rd slide in a moment for you as well, that you can see there. And one of the big advantages, of course, is this possibility of studying online. And as you can see from the slide, we've got a variety of locations, as they all pop up there, that you could study at. And the online study is a very popular way of study. It's not the only way, but there's a very sort of flourishing online campus as well. So whichever sort of method you preferred, you could be catered to. There's obviously unique advantages depending on your personal situation to either online or in-person study, and we can facilitate both of those depending. The largest campus for the AML is the online campus. But of course, we have quite a lot of students at each individual campus as well. London Bloomsbury is where I am, for instance. London Bloomsbury is a campus that offers sort of more theoretically oriented subjects, things like international human rights and things like international criminal law, and the BPC oriented routes like advocacy and bar skills. Whereas London Moorgate, for instance, offers more sort of corporate and tech-oriented AML modules, but together they make a whole, and you can obviously make up quite a balanced, flexible degree, but studying at both. And each campus offers its own set of specialisms, but they can all be integrated with one another, particularly through the online campus. So you could be studying, say, 3 of your modules at London Bloomsbury and do one of them through the online campus. So the different locations, the point being here, the different locations do have their own identities in the AML. They will determine the sessions that you can take from a face-to-face perspective if that is how you decide to study with us. But of course, the online campus offers all of them. And you can mix and match, as mentioned. I'll probably say a bit more about that as we progress. And yeah, I think that's all I would say on this slide. So turning then to the specifics, I mean, we've sort of anticipated a few of the points that we'll be making, but in terms of illustrating the different programs you can take, because so far I've talked about the AML, but it's not just one program that we offer. There's a variety of different named programs, which is quite beneficial because you can obviously tailor it to the way that you're going to find most useful in terms of substance and how you'll be displaying what you've done to potential employers, etc., after having completed it, in terms of demonstrating a specialism, which is a big thing we're very keen on the AML, is how to make your degree specialist, as will be apparent momentarily. So there's quite a sort of structured approach to the LLM where you'll take, before I move on to those specific name programs you can take, I suppose some general remarks about the structure of the LLM. And typically, if you take the full degree, because as I'll go on to say, there's more than just the degree as a whole. You could do 1 term or 2 term, but typically what you'll do is take 3 terms and pick 4 modules, and you'll have a dissertation term as well. And these 3 terms obviously are made up in the terms you'll do 2 subjects in the first term, 2 subjects in the second term, and then you have your dissertation term. And if you take it part-time, that means, of course, you'll be doing 6 terms, and part-time is a relatively popular option because particularly on the online campus, many of our students are studying whilst working in order to enhance their specialism or study something they find interesting, or both, or open career doors, all sorts of reasons. But we have many students who are part-time, many students are full-time, but bear in mind, of course, the structure that I'm talking about there does change if you do it part-time. And the modules you take will be determined based on the program that you take. So that's what I'll say a little bit about now. The dissertation will also reflect your named program. So turning on to the next slide, as you can see, there's more on the next as well. But
sorry to interrupt you, Dan. We still can see your first slide only for some reason.
Still now?
Yes.
So you've only seen the first slide this whole term? This whole time?
Slide 2, yeah.
Slide 2, that's right, yeah.
Okay, that's no good because there should be plenty to see. I'm going to retry resharing the screen and see what happens.
Thank you.
I'm just going to share the screen as a whole and not share the app, and hopefully that will fix it. So does this change? Are you now looking at study at one of our many locations or online? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I hope so. Okay. So yeah, that's a relief. So that, just to illustrate, this is what it probably seemed a bit strange, but what I was going through was just before was this. I mean, I read this out, so there's not too much to say extra, but this is what I was referring to when I was talking about the online campus versus the local campuses. There you've got London Bloomsbury, London Moorgate, which are the examples I use just because I'm the PSL for London Bloomsbury. But of course, these all have their own specialisms, and yeah, here we are. So this is the master courses. You didn't really miss too much there, but I'm glad you said that because this is where it becomes pertinent. There's more than these. I'll go on to the next ones momentarily, but I'll pick on a few examples here just to illustrate the way the name programs work because they're all very similar. And the structure that I just spoke about is generally the structure that will be followed, in the sense you've got if you're doing full-time, you have 3 terms, 2 modules in each term, and then a dissertation term where you do a specialist dissertation under guidance of a expert in the area to sort of add to the expertise that you developed in the modules you've picked. But the named programs here, these aren't these are the sort of named awards you can get. There's more modules that fit into this, but these are the awards that you can get at the end of it. And just because it's the one I'm familiar with, and it's only for illustrative purposes, a good example of this would be the International Human Rights Law name program, which is one that's quite popular at Bloomsbury, and this is one of the ones that I teach on. And in this instance, you would, for instance, take currently this is undergoing some development at the moment. I'm designing a new module for this at the moment, but the idea would be you take something like international human rights and domestic human rights and maybe international criminal law, and then you've got a choice of a variety of other things to try and sort of tailor your degree to fit into this name program. And that can be quite specific. You can take all the modules that orient around international human rights law, so domestic and judicial review, which is in progress, international human rights, international criminal law, in the future public international law. The idea will be you can take all of these different but similarly related ones, but you obviously have to take international human rights law at the very least, or you can mix and match and take a variety of others. So if there were other modules that you like the look of, you could take just international human rights law and domestic human rights law as 2 modules, and then vary up your degree a little bit by taking 2 others. Or you could be very focused. The dissertation would have to be in your name program no matter what you take, but that's not, I mean, that is generally not seen as a problem, but rather a good thing for students because you pick a name program because you want to develop a specialism in it, and the dissertation is a very significant part of the studying, and obviously doing it in that specific area is quite beneficial, and I think probably the most enjoyable part of the course, because you're really reining in on everything that you've done in the first 2 terms to make a really unique independent project with specialist supervision. I think that's a really nice feature. And it's something that you can also use. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can use the LLM. There's all sorts of reasons to take the LLM from both sort of a deontological and an outcome-based perspective. You might just find the subject interesting and have some sort of utilitarian goal for it, I mean. But one thing that's obviously useful is to be able to give you something really, really significant to talk about that demonstrates your interest in a certain area of law. Regardless of whether you're going into a more traditional legal path or, something more like an NGO route or something like that, great variety of possibilities. But to be able to go into interviews and demonstrate that sort of expert knowledge which you develop during your dissertation, which links into your named program award and any of the potential work experience you got during the time as well, it can set you up very well if it's an area of law that you're previously interested in, of course, because taking a named program is a commitment to a specific kind of content, and you want to make sure you really enjoy it before you do that. There's a couple of ones that work slightly differently. One, for another example, so that structure I've given is sort of how it works most generally. But you've also got, say, for instance, international, Master of Law International, Master of Law brackets International, just below International Human Rights Law. This is done slightly differently because what it involves is taking at least 2 of the international modules and then doing something in international law in your dissertation as well. So it does follow the same sort of rough structure, but it's not that you can. It's more of a generalist award, but not as general, for instance, as the very last one here, which you can see is Master of Law General. And this one doesn't have any of the This is actually the most popular one because some people don't. So they want the LLM, but they don't know exactly what they want to do with the name programming. They don't want that focus. They want the freedom to pick a variety of different options. And that's obviously ideal for someone like that. And this is the very bottom one here, Master of Law General. This is a very, very popular one. And it doesn't mean you don't have to take, you can take whatever you want to your dissertation, whatever you want. So the idea is that the variety of these name programs allow you to create your degree in a relatively tailored way, build on the different modules to, be able to demonstrate after having completed the degree that you do have a firm specialism, or that you've got a great degree of flexibility and you've studied a variety of different things. If that's what you want your outcome to be, then you've got the Master of Law General. And there's no right or wrong answer to that. But it is one of the big advantages is that you can really hone in on something very specific here. But you can still do that even with the Master of Law General. It might just be that you're crafting something quite particular that doesn't fit into a narrow framework. So we've also got a couple of others that are worth mentioning because they work slightly differently, not just to burden the same point over and over again. I'm only mentioning extra ones which operate in a slightly different function. And you've got corporate governance and corporate governance grad here. These cover the same sort of content, but the second one here qualifies you for CGI membership. It gives you the sort of it's an integrated degree in the sense that the modules you study will link into this external qualification by agreement between the university and the CGI, and in order to so it's a regulated content, which means if you take that, you have to take these 4 subjects, which can be obviously looked up when you peruse the website. If you're interested in this route, this information is all available there. But just for your information now, that would mean taking company law and compliance, corporate governance and practice, board dynamics and strategy, and balance accounting and risk management. And if you don't want that sort of train tracks route, because those are sort of predetermined in order to gain the external qualification, then you can take the corporate governance without that strict requirement, and then you could take it slightly more variants in modules, but it doesn't make you eligible for CG membership. So the other thing is that you have you probably notice you've got international corporate governance. That's not regulated either. It's part of corporate governance, and this is just this one particularly, which is on that very specific framework, which is useful if that's what you want. And I think that covers all the sort of ones that work unusually. Everything else I haven't mentioned follows the same format of international human rights, which I mentioned about, picking the core module, and then you can be flexible after that, but your dissertation has to be in it as well. And that's the same for all of these. There are a few more. These are currently hoping for September approval, but can't be assuredly offered yet. And obviously the hope is that these come through, but it's just to be very careful about it. These are options which will at some point be available. We're thinking September. And if you're interested in these ones, then of course, by all means, please do get in touch asking about the progress in these particular name programs as well. These will work in the same way. There's no sort of, there's no special rules for any of these. But of course, only some places offer these name programs, unless you're on the online campus, in which the online campus offers everything as previously mentioned. So the choice of campus, if you are doing face-to-face, is very important. Make sure you're picking one which offers you what you want to do. Bear in mind as well, of course, if you don't do the entire degree, if you don't want to do the degree, you can do the diploma or the certificate. And this would, in sort of concurrent order, would mean that you only do the first thing you drop as dissertation, and then if you're doing 2 terms, you just do the 4 modules for the diploma, and then the postgraduate certificate would just be 1 term. So there are term-based options if you don't do the full degree, which is a nice segue to the next slide, because we also have the MSc in legal technology, which is separate, but it is the same model, and that there's no sort of surprises with the legal technology MSc. But one of the things, particularly at the modules the modules that are offered at some of the campuses, such as Moorgate, are highly technology oriented, and those can be fit into a traditional LLM, or you can take this sort of MSc route if that was something that you were interested in. And no different here. The certificate, 1 term, 2 modules. The diploma, 2 terms and 4 modules. And the full degree would be 3 terms and includes the dissertation as well. So this is very, very similar. It's the same model, but it's what we've got. Every name program has what we call an award-linked module, which means obviously if you take the name program in international human rights, you have to take international human rights. The award-linked module here is artificial intelligence and blockchain in law. So if you were to take this MSc, you would have to take that as well. But that wouldn't be, when I say have to, that's probably an oddly negative way of putting it, given that you'd be picking this as a deliberate choice. And you take a name program if you wanted to pursue those. It's just to make sure that the name program reflects the relevant specialisms. So that's quite a lot of detail there, and a few different rules for some different name programs, but the general rule is fairly simple. And one thing that's worth noting is, whilst the general LLM is very popular and a generalist LLM does offer a lot of advantages depending on your particular circumstances, there is a lot to be said for, if you are going to undertake the AML, for considering it from a name program perspective, because as you can see, there's a bit of text on the screen on the PowerPoint that it is true that demonstrating a specialism is becoming more and more valuable in terms of distinguishing yourself in the market post-degree, which is a very relevant consideration, because I think one should only ever really do an LLM in something, a master's in anything, if you have a sort of deep interest in the subject, because it's interesting and you find it valuable for its own sake. But you do want to make sure you're maximizing what you actually sort of get out of it in substantive terms. And if those things overlap, I think that's really what one should be aiming for. I think any substantial undertaking one does in life should overlap with enjoyment and productive outcome for the most part. And this is very possible if you take the LLM of your choosing, which is program oriented, which is like it's in name program, it's program oriented. You can demonstrate to people afterwards that, well, I did very close work on this particular area during my LLM, and I can talk about my dissertation and what I did in that. No, I mean, it's obviously very, very useful in terms of substantive experience and being able to make that point in sort of more instrumental ways that aren't very exciting, but things like interviews, because it is increasingly competitive, and this is one way of making that distinction and showing that you have a pre-interest in something and you're not just picking it for the sake of it. You have done an LM in this, and that's quite useful. That said, there is still a lot of value in if you don't know exactly what you want to do it in, then the general is there for that purpose, because you can still, once you're on it, sort of tailor your degree. We are quite flexible about swapping programs as long as you've met the initial criteria. So if you've done the general and after a term you really liked a certain method or a certain subject, then you can, and it's not too late for you to meet the rest of the criteria. You haven't done dissertation in something else, for instance, then you can make that swap. But you don't have to, because obviously the flexibility is an advantage in its way. And especially if you have something quite niche that you want to do, where a name program is too specific, that's another reason. And there's this, I said earlier about how sort of the LLM with specialisms and the AML generally is something which opens doors beyond just the legal, beyond just the traditional legal routes, beyond training you to be a barrister and a solicitor. Obviously, it doesn't actually give you any formal qualifications in terms of those routes. It can be a good step along those ways. It can demonstrate, that you really want to work in a certain area of law, for instance, and that can help with like chambers applications and all sorts of things. But that's not the only valuable thing. Especially since obviously law degrees are considered to be sort of beneficial from a variety of employment perspectives. You can demonstrate the relevant skills such as oral skills, analytical thinking, critical thinking, writing ability, all sorts of things that people find very valuable. And this can be good in all sorts of contexts. I mean, say international human rights, for instance. I mean, classics one that students often have is they want to work in sort of international organizations, be that NGOs or something else. They want to get involved in international law. And there's also sort of advisement roles within companies, PR roles. Human rights are obviously very important in that respect. The world really is quite open in that way, and the LLM can give a lot of options if you maybe want to go on to use it to go into a direct area of law, like being a barrister, or for something else. I mean, it's entirely personal. But the niche, this niche, the future of practice, doesn't just apply to practice. I don't think it applies to sort of any endeavor. And this is one way of demonstrating that if you find the area interesting. But of course, ultimately, the key to doing well in these things is to do something you find enjoyable. And niche does tie into that. Picking a niche for its own sake will be a very big mistake. But if you really enjoy a subject and it's a marketable niche you want to harness, then obviously that's the perfect combination. Okay. So I've probably said quite a lot of what I would say on this slide normally already, but there are some key features here. And I'll just say a bit about these different points. So one of them is starting with flexibility, starting on the other side. I've probably said quite a lot about that already. I won't bore you with any more about this. I mean, the option of mixing and matching your modules within a name program, as long as you're doing the award-linked modules and the dissertation and everything else, and taking the general and then sort of flexibly moving it around if you want to, or sticking with the sort of advantages of flexibility. It's really designed with, it sounds like a bit of a marketing phrase, but it is very much designed with the student experience in mind. It's consciously like that, where this is a program that's meant to suit you as much as the other way around. And one thing that's worth noting, I suppose this links into the embedded legal technology point as well. One thing that's worth noting as well is that the online campus does offer the flexibility to study at one of the specialist campuses where we do certain courses, but then take a third or fourth module in something that the campus doesn't offer through the online campus. So there's a lot of room for using the online campus to fill gaps in what you would find a gap in your personal perspective of what you want to pick, even if your local campus doesn't offer it. So the only thing to note about that is that there are certain rules around external tier 4 visas, which we don't have any control over, obviously, which mean that using the online campus isn't available in those contexts. So if you are going to be studying on a tier 4 visa, it is absolutely essential to get the right campus, because otherwise you might get stuck doing modules that you weren't so keen on. But I think that's unlikely to happen because you'll pick a name program which is offered at that campus, and then obviously it has the accompanying modules. So it's probably an unnecessary word of warning, but it would be unfortunate if that wasn't said. And we've also got this box here about embedded employability skills. And the AMIL is sort of a synthesis of academic analysis and sort of law on the ground, if you like. It's very much a theoretically oriented degree. It's an LLM. It's a master's in law. So it's going to be a lot of theory. But we kind of link it into very specific outcomes, and sometimes those can be quite. I mean, it doesn't mean just looking at sort of practice nonstop, but sort of practicing, or we have practice-oriented activities, and those can be sometimes not what you'd expect necessarily, but making sure that the learning outcomes combine with. If you're being assessed by essay, then quite regularly we'll have sort of practice essay sessions as part of the course, where you do a plan in a group, and then the tutor will discuss the plan with you and talk about how the essay could be improved, things like that. So when we talk about sort of embedded employability, this is sort of true in a sort of deep level, but it's also true in an approach to the learning outcomes. It's theoretical, but sort of applied theory. And I think that is quite a good combination. Our small group workshops then, this is another box you've got there. So the small group workshops, these are kind of the main approach we take. The groups are a bit bigger on the online campus, but they still go by the same philosophy, where you have a 2-hour workshop, and you'll have between maybe 10 to 20 students, sort of using different approaches to pedagogical approaches to break the group up, bring the group back together. So there's there's variance in that, but you'll typically have 2-hour workshops for each module, and a variety of different sort of activities, which I kind of just discussed a little bit in the context of embedded employability skills. And it's very much a philosophy behind the AMIL of its applied learning. It's not come to a lecture and be talked to, although of course your tutors will explain things to you. We don't just say go and work it out yourselves. That's not the point. But the focus is on sort of student-centered learning, where the tutor's there to assist in what you're doing and help with the sort of proactive activities in these small groups, as opposed to sitting down and taking notes in a lecture, because that sort of information transfer isn't as valuable as the development of the critical thinking skills and everything else that you get when you engage and have direct feedback. So that's the philosophy behind the small group workshops. And the blended learning point I've already made is about the option of doing one option online and maybe the rest on campus. And last but not least, we have embedded legal technology on the board as well. And this is talking about the legal technology MSc, which is an option as its own course, obviously, but the legal technology courses are available to anyone doing the LLM broadly. So if you're interested in legal technology, and sort of, well, one very popular combination is to take either the LLM general or a named program and mix and match the corporate and tech options. That's very popular at Moorgate, for instance. And like tech and industry, for instance, you can still take those on the LLM. You don't have to do the MSc in legal technology to do those. And one thing that's worth noting, because this is quite an extensive offering, is that we have quite a developed, relative to other universities, personal tutor system where you have very sort of regular close contact with someone who's assigned, one of the tutors who's assigned to sort of be your go-to person in the event you have any sort of issues, be those sort of pastoral issues or more sort of academically oriented issues, and a variety of other services which they can obviously refer you to. They aren't experts in everything you'll ever need, but there is quite an enhanced degree of personal tutoring and also contact between you and your what we call PSLs, program and student leads. Of which I'm for Bloomsbury. So you have sort of the first port of call in your personal tutor, and then obviously we have quite an open relationship between the PSLs, the program leads, and the students as well. And I think that does work that's quite nice because especially on an LLM, once you're doing postgraduate study, I think having sort of closer relationships with your tutors and you being able to go to them with things outside of the classroom strictly, even just from an academic perspective, to say, oh, I found this interesting or that interesting, I think that's something that's worth noting. There's nothing really to add here. This looks more confusing than it is, but it just describes what I've already talked about having an award-linked module attached to the degree that you do. So to use the same example again, if you took international human rights, you would have to take international human rights because it's your award-linked module in order to do the name program, and you would have to do the award-linked dissertation, which is the dissertation that you do in human rights. But then you are given these elective modules. These elective modules, though, they can be selected around your award, or you can be flexible with them. So you could say, oh, I want to take domestic human rights and international criminal law, and when it's not available yet. But the fourth idea would be, if you wanted to go all out, would be public international law. But the other option is just to take a bunch of things you find interesting, and you still get the award-linked module because you have done the dissertation in it and you have taken the relevant module. So underpinning this, you've got the research module, research methods training. Research methods training is really important because it's something that we'll gradually want to enhance, but it's already in a very good state. Is how does one conduct research? This is quite core to doing well in all of the modules that you do, because researching around the area is a big part of it, and this couldn't be more true in the context of the dissertation where you're expected to do a big research project. So it's meant to link into all this very closely. And obviously not going to read all of these out, but you can see a list of sort of the modules as well. And this will be slightly different by the time it's relevant, but we have different routes and different sort of categories of subjects. As you can see, this reflects the sort of historical pedigree of the university in corporate subjects. There's obviously a very great array of corporate subjects, but a growing array of the what's referred to here as, maybe it's not the best descriptor, but these sort of social justice, these theoretical, these internationally oriented subjects. And we've got the legal tech ones, which we say quite a lot about already, but a big popular choice is to mix up some of the corporate and the tech ones. At Bloomsbury, we do a lot of these ones, and we're developing the offerings here quite quickly. And the mediation and bar route is something very particular. So the mediation and bar route is something that if you were doing the LLM in order to gain sort of access to doing the BPC at the university, then you can take the mediation and bar route. And provided I think it's 55%, I think if you get 55% in the relevant modules, then you get to progress with a conditional, well, it won't be conditional at that point, to do the BPC. So if you were taking the LLM AML with the intention of moving straight into the BPC and to, give that specialism as well, then you would take the mediation and bar route, which is obviously a different kind of situation. So if you're taking the LLM for a different reason, where you might incorporate some of these modules, you might incorporate some of these other bar route modules because they are standalone modules. But I think you probably makes sense. There's not too much left now, which is good because I think I'm almost over time. Probably just got a couple more minutes. But I've already mentioned this. So we do emphasize independent study, but that's not meant in that's just, and the nature of LLM study is going to have a lot of independent study. The important point is how it's reinforced at the engagement level. And we have kind of 3 stages to it, sort of the preparatory stage, the engagement stage, and the consolidation stage. Activities revolve around those 3 stages. The primary interactive stage with your tutor is obviously the engagement stage, but we kind of have this rotating week by week model, prepare, engage, consolidate, which is pedagogically tested and proven, obviously, for fairly transparent reasons. And as you can see, just from general year view, we have, there are gaps here, and you do 2 modules, and there are period for revision, period for assessments, etc., etc. Fairly standard term structure, as you expect. It's as it should be, really. And this being the last slide, we've got a few options here. There's not too much for me to discuss directly about this slide, but it does provide some useful information. One thing that's worth noting, though, is that there are a variety of sort of scholarships available, which are worth looking at because they change and update, but they are sometimes sort of specific to different campuses, and some of the campuses may be quite small, for instance. So there's not a great deal of people applying for these. Obviously, the people who go will be applying, but some of the campuses are much smaller than others. So Bloomsbury is a relatively large campus. Some of the others are relatively small. Obviously, there's still plenty of students to interact with, but the less students who go to a particular campus, the more potential for funding there is. So it's worth considering and consulting the website about the different forms of funding options you might have on a broad level and a campus level. And as you can see, you've got the course fees here. If you're a domestic student, there's a student loan company option as well, which is available for the LLM and MSc. And we, of course, can help with any questions you have about that in due course. If you take a look at the sort of funding availability on the website, and consider, of course, the sort of postgraduate loan for students, which is an option if that's one way of funding it. And getting bursaries obviously helps mitigate the costs. Feel free to get in touch with any of those questions, and the student information team will be very happy to help with those, of course. Speaking of questions, that's all from me. I think I'm a few minutes over, so my apologies for that. But yeah, I have nothing further to say except to respond to any questions. So go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan, for the presentation. I think that was really comprehensive and you've covered a lot of ground. So we've got, just to let the students know, we're going to be online for another 15 minutes. So please do feel free to post any questions in the chat box. I think we've had our very first one come through now from Tanika. So they're asking, what are the entry requirements? I think, Tanika, you might have to be a bit more specific about entry requirements for what exactly, but I don't know, Dan, if you want to take that one. For the LLM?
Yes, of course. So entry requirements to start the LLM. To be honest with you, this may seem like an ignorant response, but I don't actually know the answer to that. I wouldn't want to guess. I think that's one that I'm not sure if anyone else on the call from SI perhaps knows, but I think I'd have to check that, or perhaps shoot the information team an email on that one.
I'm happy to take that question if that's okay. We need 2-2 minimum second-class honors degree to get into any of the LLMs or MSc legal technology. I hope that answers the question. But we do also have country-specific entry requirements on law.ac.uk. If you go to the student section, under students, there is international page. In that international page, you can select your country where your previous studies is from, and you can check what 2-2 is equivalent to in your country.
Thanks very much, Raj. Appreciate that.
Next time.
Brilliant. Yeah. So Tanika has said thank you as well. We've got one question from YouTube about, I think this, I'm assuming the student's an EU student, but they're asking, is there any difference in fees if they're an EU student, but they have a pre-settled status in the UK?
Okay, I'm happy to take that question, Dan, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yes,
I'm glad you're here.
No problem. Just this is one of the very frequently asked questions, so I'm quite familiar with that answer. It's the same fees actually, Ravina. So we don't use the EU nationals with pre-settled status students to get the home tuition fee.
That's what I was going to say as well. Yeah.
Sorry, I snatched the opportunity from you.
No. Just kidding.
Brilliant. This is just more a question from me. I was just wondering, with the students coming in September, let's say if all was to go ahead as planned, I'm assuming the students will be kind of back into classes and things, but what measures have you got in place in case there was to be another lockdown or students were not kind of allowed to be in groups and things like that?
Yeah. So having been through that process once, which was handled quite well. I mean, it's not really for us to say, but the response previously, when it was an unknown quantity, was very good across the whole university. That's not particularly a unique feature of the AMIL. It was just really well handled. That's fully well anticipated as a possible option now, obviously. And the AMIL is in a very, very good position with respect to that, particularly because of how comprehensive the online campus is. But you don't have to study. It doesn't mean you transport to the online campus entirely. That probably doesn't mean much to you, but it doesn't mean you have to transition your degree to the online campus, because we have a very comprehensive sort of movement from face-to-face to streamed, which is already fully in place. At the moment, students are swapping back and forth based on their personal circumstances. If a student, for instance, doesn't feel comfortable coming to face-to-face at the moment, they can do streamed. And it doesn't even change your timetable. You keep the same room, you keep the same time, and you just attend the same sort of virtual session we've got a list of virtual rooms which you attend. So if you do swap to streamed, it's actually very, very seamless. So seamless, in fact, that a lot of students are swapping back and forth currently at the moment. So it doesn't really change anything. It would just be done en masse, so to speak. So hopefully that helps with that.
Yeah, and like you said, you've kind of been through this process before, so now I think all universities are probably more well equipped to deal with anything that's thrown their way with regards to this. I was just wondering, with students coming in from certain countries, there are like quarantine requirements, and there's a 1750 fee attached to it. Is there any sort of support that the University of Law is offering to those students in terms of just advice or financial support or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, I don't know if there's any sort of reduction of fees per se, but I think that sort of question would best be directed towards maybe the financial services or student information. Maybe I'm not sure if you have any views on that, Raj. Maybe you can.
Dan, yes, I was about to pitch in. Ravina, we are aware of some of the universities have already got some plans in place for that, and we have put a request. It's in the final stages of approvals, and this is specifically for the international students. So I would say, when we get the final confirmation, I'll be happy to share that information with you and the team. But we have put a proposal, and we have something that is coming out, hopefully very soon.
Brilliant. No, that's good to hear. Dan, you mentioned earlier in your presentation LLM with specialisms. I think that might be quite interesting for some students. Like, how do they go about deciding which specialism to pick? And is there any sort of advice that your team or the mentor will offer them during the course? Is there something they have to decide before they even join?
So typically the idea would be to pick the name program and therefore the specialism in advance, but we do allow people to swap as long as they can still meet the criteria once they're sort of on campus and settled, because it is often the case that you might not know exactly, take the LLM general, and realize you really, really love one of the subjects you took and you want that to be your specialist name program because you want to go into that area afterwards. And that's obviously a very realistic situation that could occur. So that either way is completely fine. But I think if you have a pretty good idea already, then I would pick the name program that you like, because you can always still change in the other way as long as you haven't started the dissertation or excluded the relevant module that would allow the alternative name program. And in terms of actually picking it, because the start of your question revolved around sort of how would they go about picking it, I think it's something that you can get advice on, but it's also going to be, I hope this isn't inadequate and you understand what I mean, but it's going to be partially an instinctive decision what you want your name program to be, because you should pick something which is something that's the word passion is used a lot and it does lose its meaning sometimes, but you should pick something that you are truly passionate about, because it's something which is people are going to ask in the future, well, why did you pick this particular name program? Because it's a specialism that you'll be doing, obviously. So they'll be interested in that, and you want to be able to use it in a relevant way and be able to answer that question in a persuasive way. And it's not just instrumental. It's not just that there's instrumental outcome in picking something that you're specialized in. It's you want to enjoy. An LLM should be a very enjoyable event, intellectually challenging, but it's only worth doing it if you have an interest in the subject. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it unless there's something you find valuable, sort of from an interest perspective in it, as much as it's useful from an instrumental point of view as well. I think you need both those things. And if you have that, you probably have a pretty good idea of the kind of things you might focus on. There might be one or two different name programs. You might have multiple ideas, but you've probably got at least a couple that you think that one sounds quite good to me. And then what I would recommend is we can always have a chat about those specific ones and what your goals are, which one might be most appropriate. Maybe even talk about the specific content of the modules you'd be studying if you were to take that route. But on a sort of a general level, I think that is largely a matter of instinct. So that's what I'd say about that.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And it's good that students should kind of have a rough idea of what they want to do beforehand. And then, like you said, you've got people in place to kind of guide them if they need it. The other thing that I was going to ask was, you mentioned that one of the key features of the master's program is embedded employability skills. I know you covered a bit of that in the presentation, but say for anyone who's joined in a bit later, could you just kind of let us know again what that means?
Sure. So the general, I'll be more specific than this, but of course the general philosophy at University of Law is, in not just on the ML course, but generally, is to sort of make the courses useful in a way which might be useful for employers. This has a very direct in demonstrating your ability to employers, that is. This is obviously has a very specific context when you're talking about a course which is designed to train you to be a lawyer. Like if you're taking the BPC or an LLB, then and those courses are designed for a very specific purpose. There's this very specific answer to that question, which is, well, what makes one, a good lawyer? Whereas it's not, whilst there is an answer to it, the answer isn't so clear cut in the context of an LLM, because there's a lot of different reasons to take an LLM, and there are a lot of very versatile career paths that can come from it. And fundamentally, it's about sort of providing a variety of different applied circumstances and not just considering the law in purely abstract ways and thinking, well, how would we apply this to various real circumstances? How would we practice our skills around it? And this doesn't necessarily have to be anything always very specific. Like what sort of skills does one expect someone who has an LLM to have? Very good oral competency, very high level of analytical ability, the ability to write a very persuasive argument, to digest information quickly and analyze it, and to have a debate. These are the sort of general skills which form the backbone of anything further. And because the LLM is quite versatile, quite general, the focus is very much on those kind of skills. And those can obviously be demonstrated in all sorts of contexts, which is a big advantage, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think we've got any other questions from any students, but yeah, if you do, please do pop them in the chat. We'll be taking our kind of final questions now. But before we wrap up, I don't know, Raj or Dan, if you wanted to say any kind of final words or reminders, if students had to kind of have one takeaway from today, what that might be.
Yeah, sure. So in considering whether you want to do an LLM, I think this may be a repetitious thing to say, but it is the takeaway that I would recommend is it's worth doing, I think, if you meet two criteria in your own mind. One is this something I would find enjoyable? Would I find the intellectual challenge in this particular area stimulating? Is it something I would feel would develop me on a personal level, regardless of any other instrumental outcomes? If the answer to that is yes, then you should ask yourself the second question: can I use this in a way which is going to sort of benefit me in my life and my career? The answer is probably yes to that. If you find it interesting and you're going to want to, use it in that way. So the answer to the first question is likely to be, if the answer to the first question is yes, it's likely to be yes to the second one as well. But those are the two questions I would ask. And if you answer yes about both of them, I would seriously, and everything else aligns in terms of personal life and everything, and financial situation, all these sorts of things, then I would consider it very strongly. But I think those are the criteria I would consider.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks for that, Dan. Thank you very much. Just Rowena, just a couple of things I wanted to add was I've put some couple of links here which talks about one critical thing about we have something called study guarantee for both home as well as international students. So there are two types of study guarantee options that we offer for those who do not require student visa sponsorship. As Dan mentioned, they can easily swap between face-to-face classes to online streaming. And for the international students who would require the student visa sponsorship, we have something called campus switch. So they can switch from face-to-face to online campus for the first semester, and then they can join. They can come and join in the UK for a face-to-face classes in the beginning of the second semester, and they would still be qualified to get the graduate work permit. So just wanted to add that, and then I've put those two links there. So yeah, the students might find them interesting.
Brilliant. For those watching on YouTube, I've also added those two links that Raj has just shared on YouTube. And the question from Tatiana, yes, you'll be able to view this presentation again. So I've just sent you the YouTube link. So if there's any bits you missed out on, you can kind of go back and rewatch it. But yeah, I think that would pretty much be a wrap. And thank you so much, Dan and Raj as well for supporting. I think it was a really informative presentation, and we hope to be able to welcome you back, students, for any other presentations with SIUK in the future. Thanks.